In today's class, we'll learn something what is known as vector-borne diseases. I think previously in all the classes that have been lectured to you, especially in the classes on zoonosis, I had covered the fact that how some animals can actually transmit animal diseases and even human diseases from one person to the other. Similarly, recall the initial classes in which it was told to you how the transmission of communicable diseases occurs. There was a particular mode of transmission called direct transmission or indirect transmission. Under the indirect transmission category, a very important and significant part is vector-borne transmission. Now you obviously wonder what is a vector. Vector over here basically means a vehicle by which the pathogen can transfer from one place to the other. The initial might be the source of the environment, it could be an animal source, it could be a non-living source, and with the help of this vehicle, will ultimately be able to infect another human being. So broadly speaking, those are all known as vectors. Now, if we look at the definition of the vector, it basically means any living organism that transmits an infectious disease to human beings. It could range from a mosquito, which sucks the blood from an animal or a human being and transmit the organism, be it a virus or a parasite, into another host, that is a human being. We can also find the vector being a fly, which does not acquire the organism itself but merely transports the infective pathogen from one place to the other. By that logic, we can divide the vectors into two types. The first type are the biological types. That means the pathogen is involved in the life cycle associated with the vector. That means in somewhere down the line, either development or replication or maturation, the infective pathogen is related with the vector. In all other cases, we call them as mechanical vectors. So in mechanical vectors, the vector over here merely carries the pathogen. But in case of biological vector, the vector will allow either multiplication or maturation or development of the infective pathogen within the vector itself. Now, what are biological vectors? The organism might grow, develop, or reproduce. And what are these? The examples would include mosquitoes. You know, a lot of diseases caused by mosquito, transmitted by mosquitoes. Ticks. The ticks over here, the human ticks, they are commonly associated with diseases spread by or known as the Lyme disease, not present in India, but in the American continent it is very much prevalent. And the other include the tsetse fly, which transmits a parasite known as trypanosoma, again not present in India. Then sandflies. I think sandfly you have already read in leishmaniasis, and this is a very big problem in India. Finally, the triatom or kissing bugs. It causes transmits trypanosoma cruzi, also known as the Chagas disease. This is also seen in the African continent. So how do they spread? Now, please try to recall when the pathogen is either multiplying, developing within the vector, it needs an exit portal, both an entry portal and the exit portal. That's why you will see most of these types of vector will bite the human being, and in some of the cases, they might even defecate. Okay. Coming to the mechanical vectors, the vectors do not get or acquire the organisms themselves, they merely carry them. And the examples would be very commonly house flies, cockroaches, and fleas. Now, I think it is pretty much evident that mechanical vectors, because they only transmit the pathogens, so they will contaminate food and water predominantly and causing gastrointestinal diseases. Another way of classification would be based on the type of the vector, whether it's an arthropod vector or a non-arthropod vector or a zoonotic vector. Now, please remember that even in zoonotic vectors, bites of dogs or rodents can spread rabies. Thereby, they also become vector in this case. Okay. But for all practical purposes, we are more concerned about the difference, that is the mechanical or the biological one. Now let us look at the vectors. The first vector would be mosquitoes. I think you are pretty much acquainted with mosquitoes. There are many types: the Aedes, Culex, Anopheles. Different species of mosquito transmit different pathogens. They have different biting habits. And a very important part of the mosquito is, if you have gone through and read the dengue pathogenesis, you would have understood that there are different sets. Like in dengue, there is a specific urban cycle and a specific sylvitic cycle. That is the cycle of the virus that goes in the forest animals only. And when the human beings venture into this forest area, they get the infection of the forest cycle or the sylvitic cycle. Now, what would the mechanism of transmission? It's very simple. Mosquitoes, the female mosquitoes, they need protein for production of eggs. They will bite animals and human beings, suck their blood, and during sucking of the blood, they will acquire the organism from the blood of the host, in this case, either an animal or an infected human being. The organism might get developed inside the mosquito or may not. For example, in case of Plasmodium parasite, the specific sexual cycle occurs within the mosquito itself. Whereas, in case of a virus like a chikungunya or dengue, the virus merely presents there, does not multiply in significant number. The other would be ticks. So, tick-borne diseases are a variety of diseases. There are many rickettsial diseases spread by ticks. The important disease in India would be scrub typhus, that is spread by chiggers. Now, what is the importance of the ticks is that these ticks are present predominantly in the bushes and small forests. They get attached to the body surface of human beings and bite them for blood, obviously, and they get stuck with the surface of the skin, be the hands or legs. Many diseases are spread by ticks, like Lyme disease. But in India, please remember, Rocky Mountain spotted disease is very important, especially in the southern Indian areas. There are many species and types of ticks based on which various diseases are spread. Like in the North American subcontinent, there is North America, there are different types of ticks. In Southern America, there are different types of ticks. Next comes the fleas. What are fleas? Fleas are almost like mosquito-like, but they are not mosquitoes. They are slightly smaller, and in they are commonly associated with rodents. Now, these fleas, they will get attached to the human body surfaces, and again they will suck for the blood. The diseases spread include the plague and murine typhus, and another disease known as cat scratch disease. The most important disease is plague. The plague can spread rapidly through rodents and also through the fleas. The bite of the fleas can also spread the disease. Triatom bugs or kissing bugs, they spread a disease known as Chagas disease or trypanosomiasis. This disease is not seen in India, in the African continent. So what they do is that these bugs carry the parasite, that is the trypanosoma, in the guts. They get attached to the human skin surface, they will bite, and when they ingest, they defecate. And because of the various secretions in their injecting apparatus, the person will have an itching sensation and they will itch. And during the process of itching, the defecated material will come in contact with the blood. The parasite remains within the feces and through the entry wound would enter into the human body. Sandflies is are very common. And India, you know, the sandfly is transmitting what is known as leishmaniasis. They are almost like mosquito. They are smaller than mosquito. There are many differences. I'm not going into that. Another vector would be the tsetse fly. This spreads African trypanosomiasis, not in India. Another fly, that is the black fly. This spreads what is known as onchocerciasis or river blindness. They try to lay eggs and they prefer moist areas, and especially in dry arid areas they get attached to the human body and come in contact with the moist surfaces of the human body. A very common moist surface is eyes, and on the conjunctival surfaces they lay try to lay the eggs, and during that process they transmit the onchocerciasis. The onchocerciasis then cause local infection which cause um, sometimes can aggravate and cause blindness. And this disease was seen mainly in the arid conditions in the Africa along the river basins. That's the reason why they are called as river blindness. Another important part is lice. I, I think almost all of you are acquainted with what are lice. Please remember, important lice which spreads disease is not head lice, it's the body lice. Body lice, they spread what is disease known as epidemic typhus or relapsing fever. And finally, we can look at what are flies. These flies may include all types of flies, including house flies. Now, they are not biological vectors, they are only mechanical vectors. The flies, they eat and vomit and defecate on various putrid materials, and then they may come in contact with human food and water, thereby transmitting food and water diseases. And the last part are mammalian vectors. In the mammalian vector, the most important part are the rats, which can spread many diseases, including leptospirosis, rat bite fever. These are important diseases. Okay. Now, what is an important part is that the vectors, they, now I have already told you there is an urban cycle and there is a national cycle or the forest cycle. Now, even in the urban cycle, we can find all these vectors conveniently present within our vicinity. The predominant reason why they are present include the poor sanitation or people coming in contact with wildlife, and sometimes many vectors may transport from one geographical area to another geographical area and get adapted to that environment and thereby spreading the disease. In India, we have a national program called National Vector-Borne Disease Control Program. In that program, the government of India is trying to control the important diseases. The important diseases are malaria, chikungunya, dengue, filaria, Japanese encephalitis, kala. These are the important vector-borne diseases that has been targeted by the government of India. Okay. Other than that, there are many numerous diseases. Some may be rarely seen in India, some are not seen in India. Okay. But as far as the Indian context, the problem statement are these diseases. Now, if you look at all these diseases, almost all except Kala-Azar are transmitted by mosquitoes. So, the vector-borne disease control program is predominantly targeted for mosquitoes. Now, what are the diseases? Malaria, I think you all know malaria is caused by Plasmodium. There are 4 species of Plasmodium. Depending on what type of the parasite that infects, you will have various presentations. Falciparum, which can cause severe malaria, complicated malaria, to vivax, to ovale. Then, according to the habitat, we know poor hygiene, waterlogging conditions, these will enhance the breeding of mosquitoes and thereby will enhance spreading of the disease. The common symptoms of malaria would be high fever with chill and rigor, headache, and especially in case of falciparum malaria, you can find complications like cerebral complication or sequestration. So the diagnosis of malaria is commonly done with rapid diagnostic kits and examination of thick and thin smear. Other than that, if the facilities are available, we can also use quantitative Buffy testing for the diagnosis. Treatment of malaria is now commonly done with artesunate therapy. Next is dengue. Dengue is caused by a flavivirus known as dengue. There are actually five subtypes of dengue virus, and it is also known as break-borne fever. It is spread by Aedes mosquito, and Aedes mosquito actually breeds in fresh water. Hence, this mosquito has conveniently adapted in the urban or the human habitat. So, this mosquito is also known as tiger mosquito because of the white stripping found seen on the body. Now, dengue is a viral disease, causes viremia. Problem with dengue virus comes with secondary infection with dengue. That means because there are four subtypes, if a person gets infected with one subtype, normally the episode of the dengue fever subsides with a typical viral illness. Problem arises when the same person is infected with another subtype of dengue virus in the future. What happens is that during the first exposure, the person gets infected with the one subtype and produces non-specific antibodies against that subtype. Subsequently, when the same person is infected with another subtype of the virus, now these non-specific antibodies will be produced in even huge numbers. And these non-specific antibodies will enhance the cellular penetration of the virus in the second infection. And that is the time when the disease spreads almost throughout the body and the patient will have systemic disorders, that is more than two systems might be affected. There we call, and sometimes the patient may go into shock, that is what we call as dengue shock syndrome. Okay, and if shock is not present, we call it as severe dengue. So all in all, we can say the first episode of dengue, irrespective of the subtype of the virus, will not cause severe forms, but subsequent infections may lead to severe dengue. Now, for dengue, there are many symptomatic treatment. Okay, for signs and symptoms of dengue fever is obviously fever with severe pain in the body. Sometimes rash can be seen and pain behind the eyes. A very significant uh, thing that happens in dengue fever is the decreasing platelet count. Now, the antibody that actually the body produces to protect against the dengue virus, it itself causes destruction of the platelets. And because of the reduction of platelets, the patient may have bleeding episodes. Another part of the bleeding is when the patient undergoes dengue shock, the patient may develop what is known as DIC or disseminated intravascular coagulation and end up bleeding. So basically, dengue doesn't have a specific treatment. The management is basically symptomatic because the patient is losing fluids. We need fluid therapy. We need to try to control the viremia. And if the patient is undergoing shock, we need to give inotropes and steroids for management. Another important part is what is known as Japanese encephalitis. Now, Japanese encephalitis is caused by Japanese encephalitis B virus. This disease is predominantly present in the eastern half of the India, with states including eastern Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, Jharkhand, and West Bengal. They commonly affect the children. You might have even heard many children succumbing to Japanese encephalitis, especially in the eastern UP, very recently. That is the reason why the government of India has made the vaccination against JE in these areas in children. Now, what happens in Japanese encephalitis is that, oh, okay, it is spread by Culex mosquitoes. The patient will have fever, headache, and weakness. Thereafter, will show neurological signs and symptoms with signs of meningism. Again, like dengue, there is no specific treatment, symptomatic management is done. However, especially in children, the virus, many a times, many children succumb to this disease. Similar to dengue, there is another disease called as chikungunya. It is spread by Aedes mosquito. It has almost all presentation is almost similar like dengue with fever, body ache. Again, like dengue, there is no specific treatment, only symptomatic treatment can be done. Now, coming to filaria. Filariasis is a disease which is caused by, any idea? Okay, there are many causes of filariasis. Wuchereria bancrofti is a very important cause in India and it is spread by Culex mosquito. Now, over here, the microfilaria is ingested by the mosquito and this mosquito will deliver the microfilaria to the new host. The microfilaria will mature and develop into the male and female worms. These worms will again produce microfilaria. So over here the sexual cycle occurs in the human being, and because these worms are typically attracted to lymphatic system and reside within the lymph nodes, which will eventually cause irritation of the lymph nodes leading to swelling of the lymph nodes. Subsequently, the lymph node will get sclerosed, especially when the worm dies. And you know, the important part of the lymph node is that redistribution of the lymphatic fluid. If the lymph nodes are obstructed, lymphatic fluids will not be redistributed. Hence, we can find at various stages of swelling of the limb in case of filariasis. Okay, from initial swelling presenting with edema to gross swelling, ending up in this situation which is called as elephantiasis or elephant-like limb. So the diagnosis of filariasis is, if a person is being suspected of having filariasis, we can examine the peripheral blood smear for microfilaria. Many a times it is not seen, hence we can use various other methods like using DEC or diethyl carbamazine to provoke the microfilaria coming out of the blood. Another important part is that this mosquito bites people at night. Okay, so the organism even evolved in such a way that the adult worms will release the microfilaria at the night time. So it is also preferred that you collect the blood at 2 p.m. But that is not always possible. Hence, the alternative method is used to a drug called DEC to provoke and thereby establishing the diagnosis. Like malaria, we can also test for the filarial antigen test. Treatment is currently done with DEC and it alternatives ivermectin and albendazole can be used. Next is Kala-Azar or visceral leishmaniasis. Now, this disease is caused by leishmania and is spread by sandfly. Predominantly seen in the eastern half of the India with West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, UP. This present with enlargement of liver and spleen, with enlargement of abdomen. Slowly the disease progresses and we can observe blackening of the skin of the patients associated with fever. Hence, it is called as Kala-Azar. The diagnostic tests will include antibody and antigen test, including ELISA or biopsy of liver or spleen or even bone marrow. The treatment is done by sodium stevogluconate or amphotericin B, currently done in India. Now coming to the prevention of the vector-borne diseases in India. Now having seen the most of the diseases which are problematic in India, the predominant vector would be mosquitoes. So the government of India has suggested many steps for so that the vector does not multiply in huge number. The, all the steps would include maintaining cleanliness and hygiene in the surroundings, not allowing the breeding grounds of the mosquitoes, and if there are water bodies, we can use some typical species of fishes which will eat the mosquito larva. Okay. Other than that, we can use various pesticides which prevent settling of mosquitoes in the surrounding areas like bushes, shrubs, parks, even inside our homes. And for individual protection, the government also recommends use of mosquito nets and topical ointments or creams which will prevent biting of the mosquitoes. End of the day, to control the vector, it's not the government itself is responsible. Each and every human being is also responsible for doing his or her own part. Then only we can actually stop the propagation of vectors in the neighborhood of human occupants. Please remember, we cannot eliminate the vectors at all. We only have to restrict it from the human settlement area. Okay. So that is all about vector-borne diseases in India. Okay. Now, another important aspect with this vector-borne disease, you have to remember that as more and more diseases are being discovered, various diseases are also coming up. They are called as emerging or re-emerging diseases. Now these diseases are also changing, and hence the concept of vector in truest sense is also become more and more delimited. As more and more diseases, like especially with the viral diseases, this concept have also, that's the concept of vector borne has also been delimited. Hence, today, these are the diseases which are present in India. We are concerned about them. But we also need to learn about all other diseases which are present even outside India, especially in today's age where there is significant amount of trade and traveling of humans from one continent to the other. Okay. Earlier we used to say that okay, this disease is not present in India, we will not consider in the differential diagnosis. But in today's time, many people are traveling to various continents like the African continents, American continents, and will ultimately get exposed to various sorts of diseases which are not present in India. So we also need to learn. So that's the very important part which I want to stress, that even though we in India have a government program for control of vector-borne diseases which targets a few diseases which are problematic in India, you should also learn about other diseases. For example, trypanosomiasis, both African American trypanosomiasis, all these diseases should be learned. Okay.